I have a very loose understanding of what happens here. Hopefully we can kind of figure this out together. This is meant to be somewhat of a conversation. If you have questions, please stop me. This morning my wife said, "Are you nervous to go talk?" And I was like, "Well, I can only talk about what I know. And if I don't know about it, I'm not going to say anything." So you're going to hear everything basically through my lens and in my experiences. What I've done in the past, currently I'm an ESL specialist for AISD. I typically work in secondary schools. My teaching, and I've done this for 7 or 8 years in this position. Prior to that, I was a teacher and a learning leader at Colorado High School for several years. Prior to that, I taught at Travis Middle School for a decade, a long time. And prior to that, I taught overseas as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer. My wife and I were both in the Peace Corps after college. So everything has kind of been in that world of ESL, high diverse populations. If you know anything about our city, when you say Travis and PD, we're talking about our north side schools, and that's where a lot of our different cultures are represented in AISD, but certainly not exclusive to that. It used to be more exclusive to that. So I'm going to talk about what that part of town looks like, knowing that that part of town is starting to be mirrored in the whole rest of this city. We have a very, very diverse city as far as Amarillo goes. And it's kind of full circle for me, because my very first year of teaching, I was probably 2 or 3 weeks into it, as we are today, was 9/11. Like I was a brand new first year teacher when that happened. I just remember how strange that was. We had, back in the day, we used to have Channel 1, which was like a TV service that all the schools got beamed the news, and every teacher had a Channel 1 TV in their classroom. And then every teacher figured out how to hack that over time to watch TV on their lunch break or do whatever they needed to do. But everyone had it tuned in to the anniversary today. So it's kind of like, where were you on this day? Today I'm here, but back then I was a brand new teacher. I had just moved back to the United States like 3 weeks earlier after having been overseas for years. So it was a very surreal moment for us. And you see, when tragedy happens, how it causes a cultural shift. It certainly caused a cultural shift in the United States for an immediate time, and has long-lasting effects. We're going to see how those tragedies across the globe affect Amarillo even moving forward, because we have a very, very diverse population of students in AISD in our city, and our students are your students. Your kids go to our schools. So it's important for us to have the same common understanding of what the city looks like, so that we can best move forward with how to work with our students. So we kind of look at, what do we know about our city? What do we want to learn? And then at the end, what did we learn about Amarillo? So first off, I know you're going to have questions, and we will address those as we go, so please, I just want you to interrupt me and ask questions like, why is this happening? Why is this so diverse? Why is our city changing? What are the implications for children in our schools and in our city? So we'll come back to that. I think this is an interesting thing to look at. If I were to ask each of you to write this down, and we do this in some of our other trainings, most of you would be able to do this, because we have a common or shared alphabet with this language. But then we ask other people to write this down, it becomes much more challenging, because I don't know those words. I don't even know that house-looking thing is in the middle of one of those words. And then we come to another portion, and we say, well, then write this down. Well, that's actually the second fastest growing language group in the city of Amarillo. So I get lots of times teachers come to me and go, these students can't even copy. They can't even write. Well, they can write that. We can't. If I were to go to Afghanistan, where this language is the dominant language in that region, the Afghanistan teachers would go to their teacher's lounge and say, these kids from the United States can't even write. They can't even copy. Well, it's so foreign for so many, that's so foreign to me that I couldn't do it. If I were to give you 20 minutes, you could maybe do that. It's beautiful, but it's very complicated to do, and you would have no idea what you're writing. The reality is, in our school district, we have so many students who are learning English that it changes the dynamic of our city, it changes the dynamic of our schools. If we look at one school on the north side, Mesa Verde, they had 28 students enroll in 1 month who spoke this language. So the languages are Basque, which is northern Spain and southern France, Ukrainian, which we do have Ukrainian students in our city, and then Pashtun, which is from Afghanistan. And they all say the same thing. They say this sentence. There are many ways to say the same thing. We live in such a diverse city, and we live in such a segregated city that it bears learning that a lot of our students and a lot of our classrooms are filled with diverse learners, which make it a challenge for teachers, a challenge for peers, and a challenge for students in the educational setting, and a challenge for peers in the social setting as well, because it is so foreign. Most of our students from this region, Pashtun, and a huge portion of Pashtun speakers go to Lamar Elementary School, which is just a couple of blocks from here, to show you how we're spreading out. It's a challenge because a lot of them have never even been to school. If I were to go to Afghanistan right now, and I look out in this room, there's a select few of us that are even allowed to go to school. Women excluded completely. They recently banned women from speaking or singing in public. Women are no longer allowed to have their voices heard in public. And then we bring them into schools because they've been relocated here and say, let's explore this and let's do this and everyone do this chant and this song and this boy and this girl, you two are partners. Well, this boy and this girl have never been partners or equals in their entire life. It's a completely foreign setting for them. And there's tribal distinctions that get made. There's obviously gender distinctions that get made. There's all kinds of other socioeconomic distinctions that get made within a complex system of a society that has been transplanted into Amarillo. And it does just bear consideration that all things being equal, things have never been equal in our country. And we're getting there. I'm not a doom and gloom kind of guy, but we have a long way to go. You heard me say earlier, we live in a very segregated city, and I believe that. I'll talk a little bit to that as much as I can, as much as I know. But really, we have a dividing line in Amarillo. Let's call it I-40, because there's north of I-40 and there's south of I-40, and the north of I-40, where most of our diversity lies, is dying on the vine. So I talk about the north side of town quite a bit because I think it's something, if we are going to learn about cultural diversity and learn about the two sides of our city, I have to say, go support our north side, because that's part of Amarillo, and we'll look at that together. So a couple things that we work with in our city, we deal with refugees, asylees, immigrants, migrants, and and also the term minority. So let me break these down so we have common language. Refugees and asylees are basically the same thing, if I can simplify it. Refugees have left their country, fled their country, for concerns about their safety related to sexual orientation, political beliefs, religious beliefs, race, ethnicity, any of those things. They've had to flee for safety. And then asylees have done the exact same thing. The difference between the two, refugees have applied for refugee status with the United States, and we've given them refugee permissions or designations, and then they are brought to the United States and resettled for that reason, because we understand the plight that they're going through. Asylees have left for all the same reasons, but did not go through that process. They show up at the border asking for the protections. So if I can, I hate to reduce it to such simple terms, but it's the difference between making dinner reservations and going to a restaurant and getting seated, and going to a restaurant and waiting to be seated. They're there for the same exact reasons. They both want to sit at the same table. They both want to eat the same meal. Some people have just are going to be seated first because they went through the paperwork first. Immigrants are not refugees, not asylees. They're just people who are moving to the United States. So why this is important is because we have a huge number of both of these populations in our city. Within the last 5 years, and I don't know if it's still number one, but we're still right up there, Amarillo had more refugees per capita than any city in the United States. That's a huge number. We don't have the same volume as Houston, but per capita, more than anyone in the United States. So let's throw this out. Why? Why do you think our refugee numbers are so high in Amarillo? Someone shout out an answer.
Maybe like the meat packing plants and things.
We're designated as a sanctuary city or something like that, for some reason.
So both good answers. What we look at with our city is we have refugees and asylees placed here per non-profit or NGOs, organizations like Catholic Family Charities or Refugee Services of Texas, which is gone. Refugee Services of Texas collapsed financially. I guess it was mismanagement, I don't know. Which was a bummer, because when we bring people to the United States under the umbrella of certain agencies, they're provided caseworkers that help them. When that agency collapsed, those people were left without a safety net. And Catholic Family Charities has tried to pick that up, but they haven't completely been able to take on the whole caseload. So we do have agencies that place families here. Now, several years ago, I don't know if you remember in the news, Amarillo kind of threw their hands up and said, enough with the refugees. We can't handle another person in this city. So those agencies did slow their intake process with those persons. They have a formula that says we can bring this many people to Amarillo because this is what the schools can handle, this is what the nonprofit support groups can handle, places like you guys and The Place and other charitable organizations for sure. This is what the medical industry can support and those type of things. So they did slow that quite a bit. That did not stop the influx of foreign-born refugees and asylees to Amarillo because things like the meatpacking industry. We have, listen, I love Amarillo, it's great. I'm not from here, but having been here as long as I have, I love it. It's a great city. People move to Amarillo because the economy is pretty good, because it's easy to get in and out of not through airports. But I-40 makes it easy to get in and out of and go to Dallas and different cities, so it's accessible. We have a good industry like meatpacking and some other industries where you do not have to be able to speak English to be proficient at your job. You can go out to any of our bigger outskirts factories and learn your entire job through pictures and videos. I mean, it's just possible to do that. And they provide union support and good work. And our schools are good, and our hospitals are good, and there's a lot of appetizing reasons to come to Amarillo. And then once you start to have a community, any culture or country represented in the neighborhood, then it's more appealing to move there. So we get a lot of secondary migration. While Catholic Family Charities and other nonprofits place people, it's the United States. You can move wherever you want. So a lot of people do just move to Amarillo because of our industry and we're welcoming people. So let's just say that. So we continue to see those numbers rise. Right now, as far as an ESL population, students who are learning English, we've just crossed the threshold. We were 1 out of every 6 students in AISD, now we're 1 out of every 5. So 20% of our city is learning English. Now, that brings us to immigrants. Most of our ESL students in the city, like I said, I can only talk through a school lens on some of these things, were born in the United States. Almost 80% of our thousands and thousands, we'll get into that, students were born in the United States. A lot of our students in AISD who are learning English were born in Amarillo, a large number of them. They're part of an immigrant population that has moved from Central and South America, typically. We get a lot of students. One of the things I do is I go out and I assess new students, and I'll tell you the last 10 students I've probably tested, it was Cuban, Venezuela, Cuban, Honduran, Guatemala, Mexico, Venezuela, Mexico. So we see immigration, it continues to grow in our city with cultural diversity occurring because of that. So we do have a lot of immigrants. We also do have a migrant population in Amarillo that, this is fascinating to me. They work in agriculture. Our migrant programs are deal specifically with families that move to work for agriculture and then come back. They migrate back and forth from Amarillo to the Valley or Amarillo to California to work with produce typically, although we are seeing our migrant population starting to change a little bit as well, because we're having families that are now moving to New Mexico and Colorado seasonally to work in the marijuana industry, which is considered agriculture. They work marijuana farms and come back and forth, because that is as you can imagine, it's a booming industry. I think a couple years ago, Colorado had to send everybody in their state a check, what do we call it, a refund, because they made too much money taxing marijuana, that they had a surplus, so that everyone in the state got money back. So it is a large economy that is changing our migrant population. It's a lot better than going to California or Idaho to pick potatoes. It's just proximity is a lot better. And then the last term we have on here is minority. I work very hard in this city to have people stop saying the word minority. It is not an appropriate term. So, I think the Caucasian population in the world is only 14%. Right? Look at all these minorities. You're kind of the minority. Minority is like a medium term that we're trying very hard to have people move away from saying. So that's just my 2 cents on that. You're gonna have a whole dollar by the end of the day, because I'm gonna put 2 cents in about everywhere I can. So there's the definitions. Terminology for our district: ESL, English as a second language; EL, English learner; ELL, English language learner. And now we've moved to EB, which is emergent bilingual. We want all of our students to be bilingual, not consider them English as a second language or an English language learner. It puts more value on a person's home language or mother tongue, where you say we want you to keep that and we want you to also learn English. Because we have a lot of students who, when you move here, you lose your first language. And I hate that. It happens so fast. Let me give you, my wife, her family migrated to the United States. She's the first to be born here. Her grandmother never learned English, not one bit really. Well, my wife Des never learned Cantonese because when you move here from China in the 70s, her parents were like, "You are American. You only speak English. That's all we're going to let you learn." Well, her grandmother lived in Chinatown in Seattle her whole life, had Chinese radio, Cantonese radio rather, TV, all markets, newspapers, everything. She didn't need to learn English. So in just one generation, my wife could not speak to her grandmother. And we hate to see that happen. So we value bilingualism as something that needs to happen. My Spanish used to be awesome. I've been learning Spanish for 48 years now. And it's not very good. But when I was a kid, it was really good because I lived all over. And you can lose a language so fast. So we definitely want to encourage bilingualism in our students and our population. When it comes to refugees, the United States is not even in the top 10 of receiving refugees as far as countries in the world. Most of our refugees come from Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan. Sudan is not very well represented in Amarillo. We do have a Sudanese population. And then Myanmar, which a lot of you may formerly known as Burma. Still is called Burma in some parts of the world. That's where most of them come from. These are the countries that are receiving most of them. So most of AISD is made up of Myanmar. We have a very, very large Asian population in the city, as far as new students. And then we have a large population of second generation Vietnamese students, which make up our Asian population in the city. But most of our students from Myanmar or Burma are coming to us that are representative of the Korean population that are fleeing war. Well, let me tell you this. I just met a student Friday. Most of our Korean students have names like, I'm making this up, so Bo Kerr, like a 2-word first name, La So, those type of names. I met my first student, and this tells you about what's going on with this portion of the world. Her first name, I'm not going to say her last name, these are her first 2 first names. War, W-A-R, Zone. Wow. We have a student named Warzone in our city. That's her legal name. We have another student named War. It's very, very tough. We're going to get into some of the geographical struggles that are represented here, but we have a big portion of our city that are from very, very rough places in the world. I've been fortunate and unfortunate enough to see a lot of these places firsthand, and it's pretty rough. We'll get into it. Let's take a second. Watch this. This may put some of it into perspective.
Let's talk about 100 million people. You've probably heard about the war in Ukraine, conflict in Yemen, attacks in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, crisis in Syria, Afghanistan, and Ethiopia.
Many Afghans are extremely anxious about what the future holds.
You may have also heard about violence, persecution, and insecurity in other parts of the world, like South Sudan, Myanmar, and Africa's southern region. The lack of peace and security in these and other countries around the world has forced a staggering 100 million people to flee their homes and take dangerous journeys in search of safety. But have you also heard about all the communities that welcomed them? Refugees and displaced people who found new opportunities, who have rebuilt their lives and are even helping others? What about refugees who felt safe enough to go home? My name is Rayan, and I work for UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. I want to talk to you about forcibly displaced people around the world. But first, 100 million. How did we get here? This is global trends. By the end of 2021, with the war in Ukraine, there were already 89 million forcibly displaced people globally. This is twice as many as a decade ago. Many of the crises today have been going on for years, and most people fleeing across borders come from just a few countries like Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan, South Sudan, and Myanmar. This year, the war in Ukraine has added drastically to these numbers. Since February, over 4.5 million people have fled the country. So where do refugees find safety? Countries around the world open their borders so people forced to flee can seek asylum. Countries like Turkey, Colombia, Uganda, Pakistan, Germany, and Bangladesh host the largest number of refugees globally. This year, there has been an outpouring of generosity for refugees from Ukraine, who have found safety in neighboring countries across Europe and beyond. But people forced to flee do not always cross borders. These are internally displaced people, or in short, IDPs. By the end of 2021, 53 million people around the world have been displaced by conflict in their own countries. Some of the largest IDP populations are in Syria, Colombia, DRC, Yemen, Ethiopia, Afghanistan, and Burkina Faso. This year, in just 4 months, 7 million people were displaced by war inside Ukraine. People like Milana.
We'll move on from that just to give you just a little bit of background as to some of the complexities that really do shape our city. I would be remiss to not touch on the refugee population in Amarillo, if knowing that we were the largest per capita in the country. It's definitely something we don't talk about in our city very much. We really don't. It's a significant portion of our town, and it's not as simple as saying foreigners. It's refugees who have had to flee, and that does shape our district, that does shape our city, and it should shape our social narrative as to who we are as Amarilloans. It's not others, they're Amarilloans, and that's important for us to realize. So it is big. Now, real quick, the UF refugees, how many we've taken over the last several years? We're not at an all-time high. We are at an all-time high right here. So 1980, we saw the biggest influx of refugees to the United States, largely Vietnamese. That's when the paperwork started to take, to be processed and finished into the actual numbers for persons leaving Vietnam after the Vietnam War. It took a while to get all that processed. We all know the images of flying out of Ho Chi Minh City on helicopters and people leaving in a rush, but really it takes a long time. So most of our Vietnamese population came here. And then here is First Gulf War, 1994, that time when we started to see a larger population coming from the Middle East, that region right there. And then we hit an all-time low, right before COVID hit, really. And then after COVID, we started